Well, a lot of eyes of late have been on Taiwan, on China. The U.S. has agreed to start talks on a new economic agreement with Taiwan, but in light of China's threats and increased military drills and activity around Taiwan, plus the Senate's massive climate and healthcare spending bill, is it in the United States' interest to deepen trade relations with the island nation of Taiwan? What could that do for Utah companies? That's a really interesting thing for us to dig into. How can we help businesses here at home get into those markets overseas? And to help us break all of that down, Aaron Starks, Vice President of World Trade Center Utah, is on the line with us today. Aaron, thanks for jumping on.
Hey, always a pleasure. Thank you.
Hey, let's start with the kind of the broad brush in terms of Taiwan. Obviously, a lot of eyes, a lot of focus on that in recent days and weeks. What is the status there? What should we be watching for, especially as this announcement came out that the United States and Taiwan are launching some negotiations into a new kind of trade and investment pact?
Well, it's really an interesting time, Boyd. And actually, if you take and isolate Taiwan, the whole neighborhood there in the Indo-Pacific is interesting. Just read this morning that North Korea and South Korea are at odds right now. South Korea is offered graciously to provide infrastructural support and funding to spur the economy in North Korea in exchange for the denuclearization of South Korea, of North Korea. But they're not getting that. Then you jump over to China, Taiwan, and then now the U.S. has become a name in this geopolitical conflict, if you will. We have, from a Utah perspective, Taiwan historically has been a great market for our companies. It's a very vibrant, robust consumer market. Obviously, it pales in comparison in terms of volume when we think of China, but it's safe. It's from a regulatory compliance standpoint, our companies, there's a lot of ease in doing business there. Certainly protecting our intellectual property is much easier in Taiwan. But you can't ignore either market as an opportunity. I mean, the sheer volume of China, with over 1 billion citizens, and then lifting hundreds of millions of residents out of poverty. I mean, that's catching the attention. So as I look at this from the Utah perspective, I think it's going to impact our cross-border e-commerce companies more than anything. And Boyd, on that note, one interesting statistic, we think of Amazon being a huge company here in the United States. About $600 billion is transacted on Amazon's platform annually. But if you look at Alibaba in China, 1.2 trillion is transacted, and that's just in China. That tells you alone how big the opportunities are for Utah companies. So you can't ignore either market.
Yeah, and I'm glad you raised it that way because I think it is so important. This isn't one of those fake fights and false choices of either or. We have to be able to navigate that through. On the Taiwan front, I wanted to ask you specifically before we get to some Utah ties. Looking at things like chip production, obviously, is an important one. You mentioned the fact that it's easier to maintain that intellectual property. We also know there's some things working their way through Congress in terms of batteries, rather than having those batteries made right there in China, that Taiwan might be a player in that space as well.
Absolutely. Look, I think we all agree that the past 3 years has taught us that we should shorten our supply chains to the extent possible. Unfortunately, we see companies manufacturing their products, manufacturing the bulk of their products in China still. And I think we need to spread risk. We need to diversify. We need to find other suppliers. And certainly Taiwan is a great alternative to China. And so is Vietnam. And the cost of labor still makes sense for Utah companies to explore that as a market. But, we're seeing a lot of stimulus put into the economy locally to spur innovation for chip manufacturing. I think that's a great move by the Biden administration. We've got to be able to do that to a greater extent than we have. But free trade promotes economic prosperity and peace. So we can't do that at the risk of jeopardizing these geopolitical relationships we've taken so long to form.
Yeah. So let's jump now to some of the local components there. And we have been talking a lot about the fact that Utah really is positioned to be this crossroads to the world. And I know one of the things that you're doing there at World Trade Center Utah is helping kind of mark that path and help people either get back into some of those international markets, maybe some of those that got disrupted during the course of the pandemic and beyond, or to get in there in the first place. What is it that we have going on here in the state? What are the resources we ought to be tapping into to really make that crossroads to the world thing a reality?
Well, I tell you what, it is a lot of fun here at World Trade Center, Utah. We're helping more companies at faster rates and with higher quality than we ever have. It's because the economy is so dynamic here, and scrappy and entrepreneurial and young. And so we work with companies all the time who are exploring international markets, but don't necessarily have the capabilities or the experience to do that well. For example, when you're looking at China, we need to be thinking about ITAR compliance. How am I going to get my product into China? What tariffs exist? If it is cross-border e-commerce, then how am I optimizing, localizing, or translating a website in that region? How am I vetting potential buyers, partners, investors, and do I have contracts in place to protect my efforts? So there's a lot of complexity and ambiguity. And look, I did this for 10 years with my former company, made a lot of mistakes along the way. And Utah companies don't have to. That's the good news. They can come to us. We'll provide, the consultative support that they need to be successful and grow their company. And along the way, like I said, a lot of fun, and we can see a lot of success together.
Yeah, I do think there are so many lessons to be learned, and sadly, there's a long trail of tears that go with a lot of those companies who did try to reinvent the wheel or just do it on their own. And so recognizing that you have a support team and resources around you to help navigate some of those tricky international waters, I think is a real vital part of it. What else should we be watching as we move into the fall, especially as it relates to international economy or opportunities for Utah businesses to continue to expand internationally?
Very interested in two markets right now, Boyd. Really interesting to see what's happening in Saudi Arabia. They have a Vision 2030 plan that they've released. They're divesting out of oil production, investing in more agricultural technology, educational technology, financial technology. They certainly have the capital to deploy. So for manufacturing opportunities, for distribution opportunities, I think that's a really interesting look. So I want to keep my eye on Saudi Arabia. But I also love that Mexico, being one of our largest trading partners, has such a vested interest in Utah. We work with UK, we work with Canada, we work with Mexico. We've got free trade agreements with all three of these nations. Commerce is easy. It's actually shorter. It's a shorter flight from here to Mexico City than it is from here to Washington, D.C. And I think that residents fail to realize that at times. They're hungry for our business. I really like what's happening in Mexico. So be interested to see how things materialize there from a business perspective.
Yeah, great insight. Great stuff as always. Aaron Starks, the Vice President of World Trade Center, Utah. Thanks for joining us today.